I will now introduce our keynote speaker of the morning. Honorable Robert Bell. Born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Bell's mother, a sharecropper, moved him and his two brothers to East Baltimore when he was 1.5 years old. He attended Dunbar High School with classmate and friend Reginald F. Lewis. As a 16-year-old, he and a group of students participated in a sit-in to protest racial segregation at a local restaurant. On June 17, 1960, the group of 12 students entered Hooper's Restaurant, formerly located at Charles and Fayette Streets in downtown Baltimore, where they were refused service and asked to leave. The students, including Bell, refused. He and the other students were arrested and convicted in the Circuit Court of Baltimore City for criminal trespassing and fined $10. The NAACP hired a team of lawyers, including Thurgood Marshall and Juanita Jackson Mitchell, to represent the students and appeal the convictions to the Maryland Circuit Court of Appeals. The appellants argued that the use of the state trespassing laws to support segregation of public accommodations violated the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. At 16 years old, Bell was the lead plaintiff in Bell v. Maryland, a case that ultimately pushed the U.S. towards desegregation. Bell later attended and graduated with a bachelor's degree in history from Morgan State University in Baltimore in 1966. While there, he became a brother of Alpha Phi Omega. He was then admitted to Harvard Law School, where he earned his JD in 1969. That same year, he was admitted to the bar and began his legal practice in Baltimore. From 1996 to 2013, he served as Chief Judge on the Maryland Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state. He was the first African American to hold this position. Bell served as a judge at every level of the Maryland court system, and on July 6, 2013, reached the state's mandatory retirement age of 70 years for appellate and circuit court judges. Without further ado, I present the Honorable Judge Bell.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for that most generous introduction. You know, when people are introducing me, I always have some difficulty. I don't want my hat size to increase as a result of an introduction, so I always think about stories I've heard over the years. And one of them I was thinking about today was a story told by Uncle Ben Hook some years ago. He said it was a man who was being named Man of the Year. And he went to the dinner meeting that day, and he sat there while speaker after speaker came to the podium and said nice things about him. They gave him gifts. So by the end of the evening, he was feeling pretty good about himself. So he went home with his wife, and he sat on the edge of the bed to contemplate the events of the evening, and he said to his wife, he says, "Now, my dear, how many truly great men do you think there are in this world?" To which his wife replied without any hesitation whatever, "I don't know, but I do know there's one less than you think there is." Thank you all for inviting me to share a few moments with you at this Frederick Douglass Convocation. It is fitting that the Convocation occurs during Black History Month. So let me give you a little context preliminarily. Black Negro History Month, or Negro History Week, began in 1926. It expanded to a month-long observance of Black history in the early 1970s. And it has formally been celebrated in February as Black History Month since 1976. Today, I wonder, as I have done for many years now, do we really need a special month devoted to Black history? After all, our history is American history. It cannot be condensed into a study that expands only 1 month. After much contemplation, I always come down on the yes side of the ledger. For I fear that without Black History Month, there would be less of our history taught. We need Black History Month to make sure that our history is firmly and fully incorporated as part of all of our American stories. And Black history gives us the opportunity to celebrate those who are heroes, who've made contributions not only to their own lives, but to the life of this community, to their state, and to this nation. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to a place for which our fathers sighed. We've come over a way that with tears have been watered. We've come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, out from the gloomy past. Till now we stand at last where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. This is the second verse of the 3 verses of the Negro National Anthem. In it, James Weldon and Rosamond Johnson concisely, poignantly, and accurately interprets and reports the history, the travails and experiences of the African people in this country. From his capture to enslavement and eventual emancipation, they chronicled for a people the blood lost, the tears shed, and their fears and hopes. Concluding on an upbeat note, they're standing in the light of their guiding star, assessing the journey already completed and ready to embark on its next leg. I can relate to this anthem, especially this verse, as I lived in an era in which tears were shared and blood was lost, and as a result of a collective push for change and tangible positive efforts in that regard, hope was reborn. I grew up, you see, in pre-Civil Rights Act and pre-Voting Rights Act Baltimore. Those are 2 milestones that were achieved only with great difficulty and after years of sustained and focused struggle. I graduated high school 3 years and 4 years respectively before the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and 2 years and 3 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act. That Baltimore was much different than the Baltimore we know today. It was a segregated city, really, 2 cities, one black, one white, with largely separate institutions. Although the dehumanizing mandate of the Dred Scott Court, which proclaimed that the black man had no rights that a white man was bound to respect, has been overruled by a Civil War and 3 constitutional amendments, another Supreme Court, in Plessy against Ferguson, authorized, indeed made separate if equal, legal. The separate institutions were not equal, but that part of the court mandate was honored more in the breach than in its implementation, something that would change only after continual demands and concerted action, including litigation. Frederick Douglass, in a speech on the significance of emancipation in the West Indies, delivered in New York in August of 1857, had some sensible things to say about progress and struggle. And I quote, "Let me give you a word on the philosophy of reform. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all absorbing, and for the time being, putting all other tumults to silence. It must do this, or it does nothing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either word or blows, or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. In the light of these ideas, Negroes will be hunted at the north and held and flogged at the south, so long as they submit to these devilish outrages and make no resistance, either moral or physical. Men may not get all they pay for in this world, but they must certainly pay for all they get. If we ever get free from the oppressions and wrongs heaped upon us, we must pay for their removal. And we must do this by labor, by suffering, by sacrifice, and if needs be, by our lives and the lives of others." End quote. Then as now, we have studied American history. American history in our classes, however, did not treat equally the contributions of African Americans. True, slavery was a part of the curriculum, as was the Civil War. And Mr. Lincoln received ample acclaim, but nothing much else involving Black America was treated in our texts. I know that neither Dr. Charles Drew nor any other African American inventors were included. Rather than a month, as I've indicated, we had a week to study and learn Negro history. It was during this period that I learned of the intellect of W.E.B. Du Bois, the entrepreneurial educational approach of Booker T. Washington, the scientific achievements of Dr. George Washington Carver, and of the exploits and talents of certain of our athletes and entertainers. It was during these weeks that I also learned of the hardships that they endured and had commended to me the persistence to overcome barriers that one could expect, and that to do so, overcome those barriers, was an expectation that benefited the race. I later concluded that what I studied during Negro History Week and what I learned was simply an extension of American history. Indeed, invariably with rare exceptions, Paul Robeson and E.B. Du Bois perhaps the exception, the point of the effort and the value of the success was consistency with the constitutional promise, acceptance by, and inclusion in the larger majority community. Moreover, the impact and value of an achievement benefited and inured to the credit of that community. So it is that I turn to the act of civil disobedience in which I engaged in 1960, at the end of my junior year of high school. That act was both a demand and a part of a struggle for equality. That act would have benefited us, the winners, to be sure, but it was a benefit to the society at large as well, because it made that society more just, and it made it a more humane one, a healthier and more peaceful one. The action of which I was a part was the brainchild of Morgan State College students, led notably by their student government, which in turn was led by such notables as the Reverend Douglas Sands and Clarence Logan. And it was also the brainchild of the Civic Interest Group, an activist group that intended to desegregate places of public accommodations, department stores, amusement parks, movie theaters, and the like. But it was only one of many initiatives they had sponsored and implemented during the preceding 10 years. And it was the latest example of the commitment and activism of Morgan students. You should be, as an aside, I want to point out to you that in 1942, for example, when Harry A. Cole, a former chair of the Board of Trustees of Morgan, led a march on Annapolis to protest lynchings in this state. So Morgan has been at the game for a long, long time. But that act of civil disobedience to which I refer, and the actions that preceded it, were the logical extension of the successful movement begun in 1935 to desegregate public schools. We can all acknowledge that Brown against the Board of Education was a significant milestone. It overruled the transcendent, separate but equal jurisprudence, and it ushered in the new era of integration. Brown did not just burst on the scene in full bloom, however. It was the culmination of several decades of planning, litigation, demands, and just plain hard work. Brown's genesis can be traced to Charles Hamilton Houston, a Harvard law graduate, former dean of the Howard University Law School, and head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And his strategy for achieving an integrated and equal society, a goal which he set while serving in the United States Army after observing the disparate treatment given Negro officers in relation to their fellow officers. Its implementation was left to him and a partnership of lawyers, some as students, including the one who has come to overshadow the master, Thurgood Marshall. His strategy was to start with professional schools, where the resistance would be less and tolerance greater, and work up to the public education system at the elementary level. You do not know this probably, but the first case on the road to Brown was tried and won right here in Maryland. It involved Donald Gaines Murray against the University of Maryland Law School, and it was decided by the Circuit Court for Baltimore City and affirmed by the Court of Appeals of Maryland. On May 17, the Supreme Court handed down a decision in Brown in what New York Times writer Adam Cohen says remains the most important legal decision for the 20th century, perhaps of all time. It rebuked centuries of government-sanctioned black inferiority, and it began to give real force to the post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution, passed to uplift the freed slaves. Commenting on Brown against Board, the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren, said, "Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local government." Buoyed by and armed with the Brown precedents, the Morgan students and the CIG had the blueprint and the courage to stand up for the injustices that were all around them. I answered the call as president of the student body at Dunbar when contacted to participate in a demonstration against segregation in downtown Baltimore. Let me tell you, it was a frightening experience. We were confronted by angry counter-protesters who shouted obscenities. I saw at that time the ugliness of blind hatred that I'd heard so much about, but had not until then experienced in person. In June 1960, to participate in a peaceful sit-in at Hooper's Restaurant, a white-only eating establishment in downtown Baltimore, took some courage. 12 of us were arrested and found guilty of trespassing after we refused to leave until we were served. The case, Robert Mack Bell et al. Against Maryland, was appealed to the Court of Appeals, the state's highest court. And there I was at 16, a defendant in the civil disobedience case, watching a legal battle unfold between extraordinary lawyers, including Thurgood Marshall on my side, and a future judge of the Maryland Court of Appeals, Lawrence Radowski, on the other. Unfortunately, the court upheld the convictions. The Supreme Court granted certiorari and eventually vacated the judgment and sent the case back to Maryland for reconsideration in light of changed circumstances. By the time the case reached the Court of Appeals on remand, both the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore had passed public accommodations laws, and what we had done was no longer a crime. Although the Court of Appeals initially upheld the conviction, it eventually and ultimately reversed the decision, thus rendering me no longer a convicted misdemeanor. Who would have thought that after having been acquitted of trespassing by the Court of Appeals some 27 years earlier, I would sit on that very same court, serving alongside the Chief Judge. Serving alongside the Chief Judge of that court, who had argued for conviction on remand, and eventually succeeding him as Chief Judge. With these victories in hand, and countless more, and failures too, the African American community finds itself once again standing in the white light of its bright star, surveying the road ahead and contemplating its future. On that road are challenges yet to be made or faced, but which will present themselves eventually. Challenges that have been faced but not won, that must be continued to be addressed, i.e. economic parity, criminal justice reform, and most frustratingly, challenges long since faced and thought won that now must be faced again, i.e. voting rights, affirmative action. As I contemplate the road ahead, more and more I find myself returning to the question I'm asked so often. Why did you, a 16-year-old intended lawyer, risk your future by getting involved with the sit-in demonstration with its potential for arrest and conviction, and therefore disqualification from being able to pursue your dream? I've always answered that aside from not having really thought about the consequences beforehand, the Morgan student who recruited me made the case that it was the right thing to do. That, to my mind, is a good answer, and for me, a truthful one. But I've always had the nagging feeling that it was neither the only answer nor the best reason for my actions. A couple of years ago, I was asked by the Community Law in Action to speak at one of their leadership and law academies. With that question in mind, I told those young people that this society rightly can and should look to them for its last line of defense against constitutional incursions. And I challenged them, as citizens interested in law and civics, to give substance to the promise of the founders, to speak truth to power, and call out wrongs. Just last October, I spoke at an event celebrating the United States Constitution, and I took the opportunity to broaden my approach. I said, well, not a discrete profession with discrete and discerning rules of conduct in the way that the legal profession is. You qualify as a part of a very special group, the people, the citizenry, from whom our democratic republic and all governmental power emanate. Consequently, the citizen is nevertheless as, if not more, important to the sustaining of our democratic republic than lawyers or the individual holders of governmental positions. It is true, after all, that lawyers do not, certainly they should not, the causes they advocate create, or courts the cases they decide. They are brought to the attention of lawyers by citizens who believe that they have been mistreated or suffered an unjustified injury. Moreover, and this is the key, it is the trust and confidence of the people that empower the judiciary and, just as important, determine whether there will be an adherence to the law, whether people have or should have trust and confidence in the government and follow the law, depends upon their understanding of the issues, the resolution of which is important to them. Being engaged and keeping informed politically and civically will help the people to understand better and appreciate the world around them and the significance of historic, political, and cultural events. Indeed, the civic engagement of the people is essential to the health, vitality, and continuation of our democracy. That requires some effort. So I amend my answer to add, it is the necessary thing to do. We are heir to we the people, whose representatives gave us the Constitution, whose provisions we regularly invoke. In fact, we now are we the people. As a result, our responsibility is not only to ensure continuation of our foundational document and poll star, but also to ensure the faithful adherence to its various mandates, to keep it special, to give substance to its promises. This is especially the case when the public's confidence in the three branches of government is at or near all-time lows. It is to you, as much as a lawyer fighting the legal battle based on the Constitution, that this society rightly can and should look for its last line of defense. Thus it falls to you and your peers the task, and there has to be a commitment of becoming and remaining informed and engaged in grappling with the many difficult and complex issues of today. Most importantly, those issues concerning the constitutional rights, the acceptance and inclusion of your fellow citizens, making sure that they are confronted directly and with dispatch and on a principled basis and addressed in a way, in that way, you honor the Constitution. Questions are asked, I'm sure. You ask questions in your daily lives as you contemplate where you're going to go and what you're going to do. What can or should I do? How do I get others engaged? What are the most important issues? Those and the many other questions that may come to mind cannot be answered by me or anyone else for that matter. They are questions for you and your peers. You have to decide the issues and prioritize those issues. Moreover, you're going to have to decide what strategy to use. That is what the student government presidents before you, before me, did. They assessed the situation, determined what the issue was, and addressed it in a way which they felt was best able to resolve that issue favorably to the position that they held. That's what your predecessors here at Morgan did. That's what the leaders of the movement toward civil and human rights did. They decided for themselves what needed to be challenged, and they determined for themselves how best to do so. Dr. Martin Luther King would have expected no less. Lest we forget, he was passionate in his advocacy, aggressive in its exercise, unafraid in the face of opposition, even when it was powerful opposition. Indeed, the greater the obstacle, the fiercer and more resolute his resolve. As Dr. King was a drum major for peace, he would no doubt have required us to be drum majors for justice. As you all know, Dr. King's work is not done. It continues so long as African Americans, people of color, women, the disabled, and anyone facing discrimination continue to pursue legal and civil parity. But his work is not simply for those seeking inclusion. Americans of all races have a stake in the work. We must all proactively fight the battle within the law to effect change with respect to equal access and civil rights for all. This is consistent with the admonition of Thurgood Marshall, who said, "None of us has gotten to where we are solely by pulling ourselves up from our own bootstraps. We got here because somebody bent down and helped us." It also reflects what Gandhi believed: be the change you believe in. And finally, it's reflective of the answer of Will Allen Rumble, the poet, to her question, "Now then shall we build?" An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm that was vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed. In the twilight dim, the sullen stream had no fears for him, but when safe on the other side, he stopped to build a bridge, span the tide. "Old man," said a fellow pilgrim near, "you're wasting strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You never gained the passageway. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build a bridge at the eventide? The old man lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the past day I've come today, he said, there follows after me a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-headed youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I built the bridge for him. So I leave you with the notion that your task is to face the challenges that you have identified, come up with a strategy for addressing them, and build the bridges to the young people who will come after you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Esther Abloh. I'm the Student Government Association President. And on behalf of student government, we want to present you with this award.
We would like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for your hard work for the African American community.
Thank you so much.